Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. I've just got off the back of recording my military aid and assistance video, and I didn't release that because this was hot on the tails and people would have been watching that and not this live. And this is a great opportunity to speak a lot about the content of the video I've just made and to just get these great guys' opinions on kind of the war in general, where we're at, what Europe is doing, what the EU is doing, what the US is doing, and what we think about peace negotiations, all these kind of topics that are so important and really at the top of the news agenda at the moment, given what's happening in the US. So thank you guys for tuning in to watch, and thank you so much to Daniele and Germany to Ukraine, who are both, as you should know by now, involved heavily in the Turchny project organization in learning about the war in Ukraine, disseminating information about the war in Ukraine, doing kind of research, aggregating data, analyzing that data in a way that's accurate and truthful. And this idea of truth and fighting disinformation is super important to me, but it's super important to Turchny. And so it's great that these guys, we're all singing off the same song sheet here. So anyway, Daniele and Germany to Ukraine, thank you so much for coming on to speak with me.
Thank you for having us here. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and really, there isn't too much of an agenda in terms of we haven't prepared this in any kind of formal way, but I guess we could start by talking about. Before we get into some details about what the EU might be doing, some interesting news. I know, Daniele, you've been looking at some stuff with regard to movements inside the UK, interestingly. But before we get onto those details, what are your thoughts with regard to kind of a forced negotiation? What might take place in the US with Trump coming in? Because I was just speaking to Germany to Ukraine before we were live, and Daniele before you were there. So I was interested in this idea that if Trump comes in on the 20th of January and forces a negotiation very quickly, you might have this tension between, well, actually, you could start seeing Russia crumble economically and start to be in increased issues with regard to the massive attrition they're suffering. Of course, there's Ukraine in the same similar boat there. But having all of these countries and industries investing in Ukraine for the long term, thinking this war could go on for another 1 or 2 years, and then thinking, hang on, but we've got all this stuff coming online for Ukraine. If you force a negotiation and peace, then actually Ukraine aren't going to be able to kind of profit from, and I don't mean that economically, I mean that politically and militarily, profit from all of this assistance that hasn't come online yet. But there's Rheinmetall with their manufacturing facilities in Ukraine. There's all of this stuff going on around Europe and indeed in the United States. So Trump's going to force a negotiation potentially, and the United States is ramping up artillery production that's really going to help Ukraine, but then will suddenly be not needed. So anyway, sorry for that very long preamble. What are your thoughts about a Trumpian forced negotiation and how that might play out with regard to assistance from other nations?
I can go first.
Yeah.
German, just in case you can chip in, there is no problem. So we have been discussing with also Erland and many other people in touch about this team, and essentially we came out with some ideas regarding of likelihood of things happening. Now, what you said is completely in the realm of the possibilities, especially because Trump has been always said to his electorate that he's going to bring peace. And it doesn't care, of course, on what this means in terms of Europe. Of course, look at this in a more Trump-centric point of view, let's say. So now, what you said is also correct at the same time. There is a lot of interest also on US side. And this could be possibly like something that could scare Putin. So many people think, okay, so the Trump Trump to offer a deal, a ceasefire deal, is probably certain. So he will probably do this. Now, and the aim of doing this is trying to freeze the conflict rather than fix anything. And why this is it's very likely, highly likely, because when you have two factions that has been fighting against each other for so long, and before 2022 Russian invasion, you can see that there is an unresolved problem which will anyway carry on. So the idea of having, for example, a DMZ zone guarded by someone, and very likely will be European troops, it's something that is not very much appreciated by Europe at the moment, because you can imagine that if during after the first and the second agreement between Ukraine and Russia, there were constant ceasefire announced and then suspended, and then announced and suspended. You can imagine what could happen if we have people on the ground in a DMZ. So on one side you have US that want, with Trump, that want to seize this, whatever it takes. On the other side, we have Europe, which is very likely. I want to do a parallel with what happened in Afghanistan. We had the US essentially withdrawing, and we were caught off guard, essentially partially off guard, because we expected Biden to do something against this, but in reality, things unfolded very quickly. There was already the willing to retreat from US. There were a lot of conservatives in UK that were trying to say, no, wait, we should stay. But at the time it was happening so fast that NATO essentially just evacuated Afghanistan. And so you may think, okay, so it may be possible something like that, a very abrupt cease of any help, cease of any activity in what regards support to Ukraine may occur. But this time is different. And the reason why it's different is given by the fact that Europe is trying to prepare to that event. And there are different signals that tell us that Europe is not very much willing to completely withdraw, because every politician in Europe knows what this will mean. And now I leave the word to GAU.
Yeah, so I would have to add two different things to that. First, because of the forced negotiations, I think what a lot of people always forget, and what's not even mentioned a lot of times, is when Ukraine is actually getting forced into a ceasefire, into negotiations, into a hold of the war, however you want to call it. If that's really necessary for them and they can't go forward with the war without the US assistance because Europe doesn't do enough or whatever reason, why should Russia even accept it? Like, why would Russia even say, okay, yeah, you're in a weak position. Okay, I give you time to recover. It's like, I don't see any reason why Russia or Putin in general would think, okay, that's a good idea to accept the ceasefire deal. And, because I don't think that Europe is just going back to economical terms with Russia as we did before the war, right? Like all the trading sanctions getting lifted and blah, 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 just because of a ceasefire. I don't think that's happening. So first of all that, and then the second question you had regarding the facilities.
Well, actually, yeah, before you go on to that, so let's bottom out, sorry, if I may. So it really does depend where Ukraine and Russia are at the point of being forced into a negotiation. So if that happened right now, Russia are in the ascendancy and probably feel like they've got the wind behind their sails, so that they are making huge gains on the relatively huge gains on the battlefield, but they are taking incredible losses, and Andrew and his team can tell you that is confirmed by what they are seeing. But the decision to go into a negotiation might be different now to what it could be in 2 months' time. So imagine the Russian economy really goes into a bit of a free fall over the next 2 months. Oil prices come down, they struggle for all sorts of reasons, and then they've essentially culminated, if that's the case. It depends whether they can get more troops and the material from North Korea. But the decision to go into a negotiation would be different for both sides, depending on what the context is. So it's you're quite right. You might have at that stage Ukraine being in the ascendancy, getting these new units coming through from Europe, being trained up, being able to take back some land. Russia, this is pure like hypotheticals. Russia then having an economic collapse, and then Ukraine go, actually, we're not ready to negotiate now. So yeah, you're quite right. It depends what position people are in as to whether they are up for negotiating.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always the thing that people are saying, yeah, Russia's dependent on North Korea, like they're giving artillery shells, they're giving howitzers and all that kind of stuff, which is true, kind of. But when I'm thinking, and I'm not an intelligence person or anything else, I don't have any special intelligence. But what we are hearing from the German intelligence service and also from other sources is that Russia is partially getting these newly produced systems and not investing it into the war in Ukraine. They just put it in the storage units to prepare for a possible confrontation with NATO in a couple of years. So in theory, they could also draw from their stocks. It's they.
Sorry, are you saying that what Russia are producing from new is going into strategic stockpiles?
Yeah, that's at least what I'm hearing from German
Interesting.
intelligence services and like public sources, of course.
Mm.
And I also heard that from other sources within Europe is that that Russia is partly getting their newly produced systems and putting it into a big stockpiles, which they later use in a possible confrontation with NATO. They're not even investing these resources into Ukraine right now. And so in theory, if they are not producing any more systems of this or that or blah, 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 they can, in theory, draw from this stocks, that's my personal opinion. And regarding the second point with the facilities which you spoke about, I mean, yes, war is always good for defense companies, but I think we shouldn't forget that it doesn't change the fact, even when we have a ceasefire or the war has officially ended, blah, blah, blah. I don't think Ukraine will be becoming a weaker force or a weaker army. You know what I mean? They still have to get all these systems and equip their army with modern systems, Western produced systems. So, of course, that will probably not be that good for the companies who are invested in Ukraine so heavily. But I don't think in the next months or years that the deliveries will actually stock. Of course, not as big as right now because they are not in war then, but deliveries will still happen.
Yeah, and I guess with artillery ammunition, there are an awful lot of stockpiles that will need filling right across. We've emptied our cupboards, for example. So there will be the need for countries to be pulling on those manufactured output for a long time to come still. So I guess that is the case. So in terms of what is going on in Europe, and for as much as you know about the US, where do you think we are at the moment in terms of supporting Ukraine? What's looking good? What's looking challenging? What's on the horizon that is really good news for Ukraine, if there is anything? And either of you can go with that.
Yeah, I can start, and then at the moment, what we see is that, at least from US publicly, looks like that there is a willing to try to do what wasn't done so far in terms of trying to speed up the use of all the funds that were assigned to Ukraine. But of course, we really don't know everything because US announced packages, but then this doesn't mean that the package is delivered. There was like a Pentagon a press release that showed that, of course, US have delivered a lot in terms of missile and high-hand munition, which is true, of course, but that particular announcement missed the entire point, which wasn't about only ammunition, but also vehicles and other military material. So there is a lack of armored vehicle and also more basic artillery ammunition. So it's always like these things that say, oh well, we committed, but then the delivered is not exactly an encouraging amount. On the other side, we have Europe, which, despite producing much less, is trying its best to keep the pace and trying to deliver what was pledged. And I think GAU did a beautiful work, at least for Germany, to trace this one, and you can see consistency. The problem is that the numbers is not huge, and the biggest problem for Europe is not the quality, but the size, the scale of the help, because the US has at its disposal thousands of vehicles. We don't. So even if we want to, even if we have the financial capabilities, we don't have the stockpile to use in order to transfer this vehicle directly. So we have to produce them, and production needs time. So and also commitment from the government to support that production line. Yeah.
Which we are getting. Like, it's a real mixed bag of nuts in Europe. So Germany, and I know we often take Olaf Scholz at like just being Mr. Taurus. So we look at Germany and we go, oh, Germany, Taurus, blah 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 blah. But if it wasn't for Germany, Ukraine would be screwed, because they are number 2 behind the US, and they're doing a phenomenal amount consistently. And that's the key: is there are these consistent deliveries, and it's that mainly their companies that are heavily investing in Ukraine with regard to building these things that you're talking about. So infantry fighting vehicles, if they're not going to get these endless supplies of Bradleys, then they need to be building their own that are comparable. So the Lynx, Rheinmetall building the Lynx, hopefully in Ukraine, is going to be coming online soon. And then the Fuchs APC as well. That it's Germany that's doing that. And I'm sure, Daniele, you more than anyone will know that Italy, a nation that does have should have the money and the facilities to help, is not coming to the fore in a way that, and there's just a real mixed bag of nuts in Europe, where some come, Spain, where the hell have you been? France and Germany seem to be doing a lot, UK doing a lot, Italy rhetorically doing quite a bit, but are they falling behind? I don't know who wants to come in on all of those ideas.
I mean, for Germany, probably GAU is he has also probably some point on those factories. But before I jump on this, regarding Italy, the problem in Italy, I think, is mainly the government. So Italian government is highly compromised with a coalition, which include Lega Nord, which is a pro-Russian party. I mean, it is highly compromised. There are not complete proof, but that they accepted fund from Russia. So, I mean, like Le Pen did. So it's very unlikely that you will see anything more than what was already pledged from Italy. And this is sad, because Italy has maybe is not very rich in that sense, but has a lot of capacity. And what we really need now is capacity, because North Europe has enough money to help, but can't do all the job, because building a factory takes a year and a half, maybe 2 in some cases. To give you an example, we are expanding a BAE system capability of filling artillery shell. Okay, that plant was wisely immediately started after late 2022, and still under construction, and we will be finished in 2026 in the worst case scenario. Now, and this is public, so these show you a government which had put the money, completely accepted everything, and went full ahead, full speed. It takes more than 2 years to build something like that, which will increase significantly beyond any imagination the production capability in UK, which at the moment are limited from both the shell to be done and filled, because of course we have not as many factories as, for example, Rheinmetall has around Europe. We have only few sites. So, but this takes time. Now, we can't build a new factory, or we could, but it takes time and a lot of money. Instead, if we could rely on other countries to build system like APC, IFV, main battle tank in their countries, these together could constitute a collective effort, because even Rheinmetall cannot do this alone. In fact, there is another initiative in the north and in Sweden where BAE System is building CV90s for Ukraine. But also that factory is a max capacity, so we don't have much left. So this is why, and another point, and I leave way to GAU, and he will explain why this is so important. ASAP program was a kind of failure because despite it was aimed to bolster Europe capability in ammunition production, failed because the baseline production in Europe was low. So even if you have the money, you can't buy what you can produce. So, and at the time was not possible to buy abroad, like India, South Africa, South America, and even UK, unfortunately, was out from these because it was outside the European Union. So now the new announcement of the, and with this I leave way to GAU, the European Union is trying to bolster its own defense capability with the European money, which is a very good thing.
Well, yeah, just before Gemini comes in, actually, one thing they're doing, and I'll talk about this in the video that I've recorded but not released, and thank you for sending me this because you put some meat on the bones for me, is the EU has just come out with an announcement whereby they are going to allow nations across, like sort of bilaterally or trilaterally or whatever, across borders, do things to procure more equipment to reduce or to, I guess, increase economies of scale. We've seen this in terms of the cooperation between European nations. So I think it's Belgium and the Netherlands have been working together on special operations and special forces. We've seen the Nordic nations come together with Air Force stuff, and in fact, right across, I think, all of their different armed forces. Well, here the EU is looking at bolstering its defense capabilities and capacities across Europe by not allowing but facilitating nations to work cooperatively together. So instead of 3 different nations buying 10 widgets, like they separately and getting 3 different contracts, you have one contract for 30 widgets, and that produces cheaper unit cost, or so on and so forth, or not unit cost but unit prices. And this is beneficial for Europe. It's also, as this document says, beneficial for Ukraine, because it actually ends up supporting Ukraine, because a lot of these deals that are going to be done are going to be helping Ukraine in different ways. And so here we have Europe really thinking long and hard about defense now in a way that they weren't. They've got their defense strategy that says that 60% of what they procure has to come from inside Europe. We've got the US being more isolationist, saying Europe needs to stand up on its own 2 feet and be more independent. And Europe is saying, okay, we'll do that. So things are moving in the right direction. But as you say, it just takes a lot of time. But certainly Germany is heavily involved in this, as Germany to Ukraine knows. I mean, if people aren't following him on Twitter and indeed Blue Sky, and we'll talk a little bit about Blue Sky later. But yeah, go and follow Germany to Ukraine on Twitter. Go and follow him on Blue Sky, and check out his DEA IDUA, or DEADUA. .org/en. You can find out exactly what Germany is doing. His website is absolutely phenomenal. Gemini, what do you say about what we've been talking about?
So first of all, thanks for the shout out. Of course, also to Daniele. Yeah, he's not doing any less work than I'm doing. Yeah, he's my buddy. No, to Germany. No worries. To Germany, the thing is, you listed so many good things about like what Rheinmetall is doing, and with the Lynx and the Fuchs and the factories and all that kind of stuff. But the big problem is, where's the money? That's really like, when we just look at the German government, and I hate to say it, but the German government currently for the next year, you have to imagine, we have a federal budget worth hundreds of billions of euros, And for the biggest security crisis after the Second World War in Europe, we are investing for 2025 4 billion euros. And there's not everything of that money is already allocated to other use cases. There's like with the Lynx factory or the Fuchs APC, that's all dreams right now. Like Germany is without additional funds, and I don't see really how they want to do that right now. We're not going to fund any procurements for Ukraine, so we can have all these factories in Ukraine, but when Ukraine or somebody else is not going to finance contracts, then they're just staying around.
Well, it's a hope. I mean, Ukraine are saying that they've actually got enough money at the moment for 2025. It's not money that's a problem, although, you know, give it lots of caveats. It's the stuff, it's the equipment that they need, and so it could be that they end up getting funding from different streams, maybe European Peace Facility, maybe $300 billion of frozen assets, and they can be the ones that invest heavily in Rheinmetall. I don't know. I'm just thinking around the problem.
Yeah, I mean, with the 50 billion loan they just got, I mean, it purely depends, and I don't have any special intel in that, but it purely depends if they need the money to use it for their own state budget, so the government doesn't collapse, or if they can actually use it for military means, like when they can invest into military procurements. That's great, like wonderful. But if they have to use a large margin of that or a large share of that for their own budget for some reason, because the US draws out or whatever, there's not going to be so much money left, right? And this stuff is not very cheap, I would say. Like the Lynx is what, like 30 million plus per vehicle, and try to finance it. There's not a lot of countries in Europe with the current budgets which could finance a reasonable amount of vehicles for that, right? And even Germany, the only thing or the only way I see that Germany could finance a larger contract for that is with an exception to the debt break. Then, of course, we come to inner German politics. And the problem right now is if the SPD doesn't change Pistorius for Scholz as a chancellor candidate, then they are very likely going to lose the next election. Friedrich Merz becomes chancellor with the CDU, the old Merkel party, and he is against lifting the debt break for Ukraine. When he wants to get additional money, he wants to make cuts in the German budget. Okay, you can get a couple of 100 million euros with that, maybe 1 or 2 billion euros, but a reasonable amount of money to possibly replace US aid. So Germany, let's say 10 or 15 billion in addition, you won't find that in the German federal budget. Like 15 billion euros is a lot of money. You can't just cut that somewhere.
This is where we need Erland to tell us about Norway, because Norway appears they could be the dark horse that saves Ukraine's bacon. Norway will finance the production of Ukrainian weapons and equipment according to the Danish model. Now, I've talked to my audience about the Danish model, which is there are essentially three ways of investing into helping Ukraine. The first thing, from your own point of view as a country, so Denmark, first thing they did was say, right, we're going to invest in our defense industry to produce stuff in Denmark for Ukraine, so that we are stimulating our own economy. We're getting tax revenue from that. We're getting employment from that. And then the stuff that we produce goes to Ukraine. So really, it's a form of economic stimulus that we could do in any different context. It doesn't need to be Ukraine. We could just it's inward investment. It's domestic investment. So that's what Denmark did initially. And then they don't have a defense industry that can produce that amount of stuff for Ukraine. So they kind of quickly maxed out what Denmark could do for Ukraine internally. So they said, right, the next best thing we can do with our money from Denmark's point of view is invest it in Ukraine. So if we want Ukraine to prevail, then that investment gets tax dollars for Ukrainians and then gets employment in Ukraine. And they're keeping that expertise in Ukraine, and they can produce things actually more cheaply than we could anyway. And they get to produce it nearer to where they need it. And there are all sorts of advantages for doing that. And Ukraine builds what they want. And then the third best thing is taking Danish money and buying, I don't know, something from the US and giving that to Ukraine. So those are the three things. And you're starting to see, so Denmark were the first to kind of start doing this because they maxed out their own, this is how I understand it, maxed out their own defense industrial base. And then Ukraine saying, thank you very much. And now other countries are looking at following suit. Now, why I talk about Norway being the dark horse is because they made so much money out of the energy crisis, and Erland has got all the stats for this, so it's a shame he's not here. But basically, due to the energy crisis and the cost of energy going up, or the cost of oil, price of oil, sorry, going up so much, they made an absolute killing, Norway, because they own like half the North Sea and the North Sea oil reserves there. They have done something. Sorry, I'm saying the same thing that I said to my audience a number of times, but the UK, when we discovered oil in the North Sea, said, right, we're just going to allow our companies to tap into that, and occasionally we'll tax them. But then our companies went abroad and started like moving money around, and it's quite difficult to do taxes on them short of a windfall tax. Norway, on the other hand, said, we're going to say that that's our oil, and if you want to drill it, we're going to have, I don't know what it is, we're going to have like half the income you get off that. And we're going to put that into the sovereign wealth fund, and that's going to pay for our pensions. Anyway, the amount the sovereign wealth fund has is phenomenal anyway. And then they've added to it because of the price of oil has shot up to the tune of gazillions of spondoolies. So Norway now have a bunch of money that they've made off the war, such that their own opposition party is saying we need to triple the assistance to Ukraine. And there's this movement within Norway to give loads more to Ukraine. And indeed, Norway will fund the production of Ukrainian weapons, per Defense Minister Umarov. During his visit to Oslo, he secured an agreement with the Prime Minister and Defense Minister for direct financing to accelerate weapons manufacturing in Ukraine. So I don't know how much they can end up getting out of Norway, but Norway is at least going to be pretty useful to have as a friend. Sorry, that's a lot of talking.
No, absolutely.
No worries. Sorry, Daniele. Do you want to go first?
No, go on.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have really a lot of to say about that. I think that's like investing into the Ukrainian defense industry is a very good thing. It's not a replacement for what we are doing in Europe, and it shouldn't be a replacement. The big problem I see is that, I mean, Norway, I'm not sure how much money they can in practice invest into the Ukrainian defense industry. In theory, they could invest a lot. I mean, we Daniela and me, we talked a lot to Erland about this, and we know that Erland is going to rant about that a lot. The problem I see is right now in Europe, when the governments inside of Europe, like not only to speak about Denmark and other smaller countries, but also Germany, we all have no sufficient budget for Ukraine. So even if, for example, the German government a couple of weeks ago said, hey, we are now looking into financing directly the Ukrainian defense industry, which maybe results into drones or armored vehicles or whatever being financed. I'm coming back to one single issue with every second answer, and that is missing budget, missing funds. We don't have the money. Even when we say, yeah, that's a good thing and we should do it right now, we don't have the money to do it.
But there's the asymmetry, isn't it? That Russia are now prepared to completely ruin themselves to prevail in Ukraine. And Western nations, kind of understandably, are not prepared to ruin themselves financially to support Ukraine. We'll support only as far as it goes, but then we need to look after our own nation's interests domestically in terms of health services and education, etc., etc. This is a much more an existential crisis for both Russia and Ukraine, interestingly, but Europe still hasn't recognized, or it isn't an existential, or at least not an immediate existential crisis for Europe. And so we aren't prepared to go as far as, say, Russia or Ukraine is in funding the war.
The problem here, and I can only speak about Germany, is that it won't ruin us. That's a big problem, and I think with Germany is a big exception that we have a debt break, which is melted into our constitution, and I think that's a big exception or the big difference to other European countries. I mean, when we look at the COVID stuff, for example, like how much money the German government allocated to help private individuals, to help people within the few years of COVID. That was hundreds of billions of euros without issue.
Yeah, same in
You
the
know,
UK. There was this thing in the UK before COVID where the Conservative government kept saying, "No, we can't invest in this. Money doesn't grow on trees. Money doesn't grow on trees." And then COVID happened, and there's like, "Here's a bazillion spondoolies," and they spent it immediately, and then they paid all their mates to do these contracts that were kind of effectively corrupt and illegal. And it's like suddenly you were just literally just telling us there wasn't money, and now you've found a gazillion spondoolies because of the idea that there was an existential crisis around the corner. And of course, maybe that's not the realization right now. Sorry, I interrupted though.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's the same example basically, right? And I think that's also the case here in Germany. We can, if we really want to, and the only thing which is hindering us, in my opinion, in Germany is like the debt break. And there are only a very few parties who wants to work on that right now, and none of these parties is going to lead the government in a couple of months. So that's the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, any thoughts to add to that, Daniela, from your point of view? I mean, obviously we know that Italy is a compromised nation. So for those who don't know, Italy has at the moment a very right wing coalition of three parties. Brothers of Italy, led by Giorgia Meloni, who's the premier there. They were People feared that they would not be pro-Ukraine. She ended up being really strongly pro-Ukraine. But you've got La Liga there with Matteo Salvini, who's her deputy, who is completely pro-Russia, like overtly pro-Russia. And then you've got a third coalition that was run by Silvio Berlusconi, but then he died, and he was like avowedly Putin's best mate type. They were exchanging presents and whatnot. So you've got two out of the three parties, and in the right-wing parties in charge of Italy being overtly pro-Russia. So they are, as Daniela said, really compromised. So then you're really relying on the central powers of the EU to be able to take EU money. So it's not that Italy is going to bilaterally give assistance to Ukraine, but actually through the EU, there is funding to Ukraine. And that's why it's so important that the EU remains kind of centrist and doesn't have this surge of the far right and the far left, arguably, who are much more likely to be pro-Russia or anti-Ukraine. Anyway, sorry, Daniela, over to you.
No, I mean, I completely agree. And now to step back and trying to look at these most of these type of talks start by I think not the idea, but the certainty that from Trump's election, nothing good can happen. And I think there is some expectation that these could turn out also against Putin, because the idea is, well, what happens if he does not accept any deal, because he thinks that he's in a more winning position, so he can get it all. And then the idea is, well, at that point, Trump could see these as a threat to himself, and then could simply ramp up the support and even being beneficial to the entire war effort. Now, despite this is something plausible, because it would look very bad if Trump, after a negative answer from one of the two sides, because this is another important point, because if Ukraine also refuse, what will happen then? Because
yeah, because that whole arrangement is if this side refuse, then if Russia refuse, then we'll give Ukraine more weapons, and if Ukraine refuse, then we won't give them any more weapons. But if both refuse, then actually what will happen? Yeah,
I mean,
thought of that.
My feeling is that US we will withdraw anyway, either case, because also on Trump view, Europe is not doing enough, and then he is a guy that believes in deals, in the sense in exchange. He doesn't believe in alliance. You do this for me because I get something, and then you get something. It's not like I do this
transactional.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And this is confirmed by all his previous presidency, which was also affected by people who were trying to allow him to do the correct choices. Now, despite his cabinet still highly uncertainty, because the House has some leverage on the names, but it doesn't look good. I mean, it's like looking at a storm and say, it could pass. So I think what is going on now in Europe, especially after the election, is like a reality check and the realization that some time has been lost. I know that everyone did their part in their effort, but as you said, government have been very much worried of screwing their own economy and trying to do whatever it takes, but with some concern on internal economy. Now, this could be seen as bad, but also we have to understand and be honest with ourselves. Russia has been doing a hybrid warfare in Europe since probably even before 2014. And now what happened is that every hardship on European we will be, if not explained, if it's not going to be addressed by the government, we will fire back at the election, fueling anger, which will end to fuel parties like Lega Nord, AfD, UK Reform, all these pro-Russian parties, which are very populistic and will capitalize on people desperation. Because of course, for example, I live in UK, I can see that there is a problem with the increase of cost, increase of mortgage rate. So the people feel the pressure, of course, is only economical probably, but they are not in a state of mind of a war. So that for them this is the daily living, despite a lot of people know where the problem comes from, and it's not the government.
So the analogy I often use, and this is perfect actually, thank you for teeing this up. So my view is that the war is something that none of us had control over, like as individuals and as nations at this point in time. Like when the war happened, all the causal variables they were put in place and it happened, right? And yet this is a really bad thing that we all need to pay for. And the problem is that the more we pay for it, the harder it is for individuals' lives. Like that is money that our governments are going to have to put towards helping Ukraine for the benefit of the world and for the long-term security of us and the region, right? So there's a very good rationale for supporting Ukraine, but it will cost us. And the problem is that then will reflect on the governments making those good and proper decisions, and they'll be rejected at the ballot because people feel it in the pocket. You see what's just happened in America, even though I would argue that was a distortion of reality anyway. But you will get a reaction against governments that are supporting Ukraine, not because the principle of supporting Ukraine's something that people disagree with, but it has a negative effect on people's pockets eventually down the line. And in the UK, our whole economic future is built upon growth, and at the moment we're going to struggle to grow outside the EU, etc., etc. All these kind of issues that we're facing. That then, if we commit to helping Ukraine more, that could lead to the resurgence of anti-establishment parties that say, look at what this government's doing to cost us. And my analogy is that imagine you've got a tornado that rips through your village, right? And that's going to smash up my house and cause me to have to pay out of my pocket to make this a better place. And that's just like shit happens, right? That has happened, and we have to do that in order to get my property back up to scratch, or to make sure it's secure for when the next tornado comes along, etc., etc. It's like we want to blame people, we blame our government, but the reality is we need to blame the tornado. The tornado's just ripped through. We need to blame the war for taking place, and that is Russia's responsibility. So this is where, in a sense, Russia needs to be paying us reparations. We should, as well as Ukraine. Do you know what I mean? So there's a real vulnerability for us all, that our political parties will be punished by the electorate for supporting Ukraine, not on the account of supporting Ukraine, but on the account of it costing lots of money.
Yeah, and for this reason, I'm trying always, because there is some anger, when you look at the decision took too late and too little done, and then you see that, but the government have to think also to being stable and to not allow strange movement to come to power, because that would be even worse. I mean, you completely nailed it, because in US essentially what led Trump to win is not the ideology of some. There are of course ideologies behind, but also the fact that Trump has been able to sell to the American public a dream of prosperity, and this after a long period of recession and issues, for them was appealing. Now, this is a human factor. We cannot blame the people and say, oh, they are just ignorant. Everyone to want to be well, to want to see their own kids growing better than before. So, but there are also moral obligation and thinking, well, today I'm paying more my grocery, but there is a dad coming back home and finding all his family deleted, literally. So, and for me, this is among everything, but I cannot pretend that everyone has the same sensibility. And so this is why politicians have to explain the reason why we have to do this. And honestly, UK has been quite good, and probably UK population in general has been very much able to understand the struggle. I mean, sometime happened to me even recently to have people talking around it, common people, and they know that all this mess is due to the war in Ukraine and is due to the Russian invasion. Even newspaper choose their word very well. They
Yeah,
always.
because even like the Daily Mail is quite anti. I mean, luckily we've got bipartisan support for being anti-Putin,
Exactly.
and
That's the
I don't. Yeah, and I don't know whether this is a result. Well, I think it's probably a result of the Cold War, of them being like routinely our enemy, just culturally. When we're doing spy novels and spy films, Russia are the bad guys. Whereas if you live in Eastern Europe, you're going to have a much different idea of what history is concerning Russia. And that will exist elsewhere, where maybe communist parties have had more traction. But in the UK, communist parties never had traction. We've had a fairly centrist political system whereby Russia has been seen as the bad guys. Then you had Sergei Skripal, the attempted murder of him in Salisbury, Litvinenko murdered in London. And I think we've just got this general sense that Russia are the bad guys, and that's not a problem for us to believe that.
Yeah, and this played very well also on the fact that we had a conservative government that has been very much in close contact during before Crimea and with the oligarchs. We had London completely invaded, if you wish, from Russian money. We don't have to shy from this, because this is true, and this is also why probably UK at the beginning was very hard with Russia, because I still believe that some people in the Conservative Party felt used, felt
Yes.
that they were exposed, they were essentially puppets, and there is nothing
There's a lot
worse.
of Russian money in London, and we were one of the biggest nations in the world of money laundering from Russia. That's why London was called Londongrad, and and there were worries that Boris Johnson could go the other way and support Russia because of that compromise. But actually,
yeah, because I think that that there are people that are fundamentally corrupted, and people that are corrupted to the point that, okay, I can gain some money, is fine, but then when you see the fact that there is you are just like, like a piece of a puzzle. You're just small, despite you've been a prime minister. That's something change in your mind. Even Meloni, I don't like her by any stretch of my imagination, but I think after she was in Bucha, she saw what happened, and also in her nationalistic view of how a nation should love its own country, she empathized with the Ukrainians, because she looks at them and say, these people love to the point of sacrifice themselves. But at the same point, she has a government that has too weak to do anything. And all the good that has been done, despite Minister Crosetto will say that we are all idiots, has been done because the previous government, Draghi, took very strong measurement to make sure that help will continue, even if he leave. That's the only reason why some help is still going, because after he left, most of the big help stopped. And as I say, this is very much a disgrace because Italy has capacity to produce more and help Germany in doing this.
Yeah, and like Germany, so Germany to Ukraine, you will very much be able to comment on this. Germany is one of these nations that differs from the UK in having a history with regard to the Soviet Union that we just don't have. So eastern regions of Germany, being initially part of East Germany, will have a different understanding of what Russia presently is, and there's a compromise within the political system there where the AfD, their strong nationalistic tendencies, are also fairly pro-Russia. But even the SPD, the centre-left government that's in coalition now, has its past connections with Russia as well, and the previous Chancellor Schroeder. And then you've got the far left BSW with Sarah Wagenknecht, who is also, you know, anti-Ukraine and essentially pro-Russia. So there's a very different political landscape. Is that fair to say?
Definitely, yeah. The only thing which I really can't give you an answer is why. Like I'm living in Eastern Germany, and or in the eastern parts of Germany, and I'm born after the reunition of, you know what I mean, right? Of Germany, and so I really don't
Reunion.
know. Renew, yeah, thanks. Hard word for me. I really don't understand why is this still an issue. You know, I don't understand how a sane person, even when you're born in Eastern Germany, and how a sane person can look at what's happening right now and say, hey, yeah, we still need to support Russia, or I understand why Russia did it. I don't understand. I can't even give you an answer.
There's an interesting point here from Brian Ivey. So Brian here is saying word is the new administration is open to reopening the US-UK trade agreement. So I was talking about trade being difficult from outside of the EU, and we are having to do renegotiate all sorts of trade agreements still. Like 2016 was 8 years away, and we still haven't got trade agreements with most of the places around the world. It takes a long time. And he's saying word is that the new administration is open to reopening US-UK trade agreement that was almost completed at the end of the first Trump administration. Trump is an Anglophile and views the UK favorably. This is interesting. He's partly so. He's partly is an Anglophile, but actually, what's really going on there is what Sherry Watley says, which is Trump wants to break up the EU because he views it as an economic competition and not as an economic partner. Now, this really underwrites potential issues going on with EU support for Ukraine, because this is built into Trump's evaluations, and this is deeply problematic. If you go and read, but I keep mentioning this, Madeleine Albright's book, Fascism, where she has a whole chapter on Trump and talks about his transactional nature, and he hates alliances, which is why he hates NATO. Just in principle, he can't understand positive sum gains. He's transactionalist, which is my gain is your loss is my gain. And so therefore, we are all competitors, and alliances don't make any sense. We don't work together for a general goal, because I just think as an individual, he almost takes his individual narcissistic personality, which is then becomes a sociopath in charge of, as a CEO in charge of an organization, which is we're in a Shark Tank and everyone's a competitor. And he took that understanding of his kind of financial landscape into being a president in the first term, and even more so in this term, where he doesn't understand the value of alliances, and therefore sees the EU. That's why he wanted the UK to come out of the EU. So his supporting of the UK in putting us to the top of doing a trade deal isn't because he wants the UK to do well. It's because that is a kick in the balls to the EU. This isn't about, like, he may be an Anglophile. Yeah, okay, he likes Scotland, he likes the Queen, blah blah blah. But actually, this is sticking a finger in the eye of the EU and not for the UK. He wants the EU to fail in the same way that Putin wants the EU to fail. And this is a freaking massive problem for Europe. For the security of the world, and Trump doesn't care about the long-term security and global economic and international security of the world. He cares about the US doing well because it reflects well on him personally. And for him to do well, for the US to do well, the EU needs to do badly. It is a competitor. It's a global it's a global competitor from an economic point of view. And also, you know, you've got Musk whispering in his ear saying, by the way, you need to stop the EU doing well because they are putting stops on my Twitter doing this and they're putting stops on so on and so forth. And so that is your main issue. Sorry, rant over.
No, your rant is completely understandable. And I think the government, even conservative now, are more reluctant on trade deal with US, because the point is what we gain from that. Coronary chicken, NHS sold. I mean, now defenses start to become an important thing for both parties. So where MBDA and is going to work with France, with Italy, because we can then use our missile as we want, and we will produce here. Why we call the Luftwaffe in Scotland, and I mean, it's ironic, especially after you visit the Clyde. But why? Because we need an ally in Europe. Because why Starmer is trying to partially retreat from Pacific and focus on Europe? For this reason, because Europe is our closest partner. It's not less or more in terms of an alliance, but it's closer. If something goes bad in Europe, it's going to affect us much quicker in a much more rapid way than if something bad happened into the Pacific, just to say, despite it's still an important theater. So the reason why you see all these travel of Starmer in Europe recently, in France, in Germany, and also the wish on trying to include Poland in as many visits as possible, is because they are trying to respond to Trump with a more united Europe. And of course, it's difficult because Europe is not a federal state. We have different views on how to solve problems, and so we take a ton of time to organize ourselves. But I think the signal that we are getting is sorry, I'm reading the
no, sorry, this is a previous one because I just want to add to what you're saying. Sorry, and I know Germinate, sorry, I've not given you a chance to say anything, but I just to what you were saying there. So Brian here talks about doing a deal with. And this is a bit of a tangent, by the way, for the audience, but I think it's important to understand this because this does give you, like Daniele is absolutely right, that Keir Starmer in the UK is trying to get a closer relationship with the EU for a whole bunch of reasons, security being in mind, economic stability, and also the fact that our whole future depends on economic growth. That's how a budget depends on economic growth. And if we don't get economic growth, we're screwed. And therefore, the best way to economic growth is some kind of custom union or some kind of single market, or at least a hybrid version, or getting closer to Europe in some kind of way. Now, this economic deal, if we did a free trade deal with the US, and I don't know if Brian would know this, or many people would know this, but we would be essentially screwed over by a free trade deal with the US. We did a free trade deal with Japan. We did a free trade deal with Australia and New Zealand. And the person who did the deal on behalf of the Conservative government with Australia and New Zealand said, it's a really shit deal. We've been done over. Like, if we can't do a good deal as the UK with smaller countries of New Zealand and Australia, we are going to be absolutely done over by the US. Now, the biggest worry, and this is a mini rant I have, the biggest worry about doing a free trade deal with the US is that the US is massively concerned about something in the UK called NICE. NICE is a quango that we have that negotiates drug prices for the NHS. And what's important about NICE is that 25% of the world's drug prices are benchmarked on what NICE negotiates with the drug industry. So the NHS, the price that we get, I've been on the forefront of this. So I have multiple sclerosis. When I got my stem cell therapy, there was no treatment on the NHS for progressive multiple sclerosis, which is what I have. There was one drug that was rejected because NICE said that's too expensive. We don't have enough data, blah, blah, blah. The drug company went away and then subsequently came back with lower prices, blah, blah, blah. And you have this arrangement that takes place between the government, effectively, the NHS and drugs companies. And that forced the drug price down and is now on the NHS. Job done. NICE, you've done your job. You've brought the price down so that taxpayers don't have to pay crazy amounts of money. That doesn't happen in the United States, which is why you have to pay freaking, until Biden came along, where you can now pay insulin for $35, it was like $600 or whatever it is. The US doesn't have that. So what would this is the thought is that as soon as there's a free trade agreement with the UK, part of that agreement would be the breaking up of NICE, because NICE gets 25% of the world's drug prices benchmarked. Now, if the drugs companies in the US can force the American government to screw over NICE, then the drugs companies can now enforce higher prices on 25% of the world, right? This is how freaking important NICE is, and it will be the first thing to go in a free trade agreement with the US. So you can talk about chlorinated chicken, which is so that the regulations in the US are not as good as in the EU and therefore the UK, because we still have food regulations that were old EU regulations. We would get chlorinated chicken from the US, really poor standards of food hygiene, etc., compared to the UK, right? So yes, that's a problem, but drugs prices, there's your big issue. So although you might say that's a good thing to get a trade deal with the US, I would argue us doing a free trade deal with the US is probably a bad thing. And that's part of why we should have remained in the EU, because now we're a minnow on the world stage. We'll just get shafted by everyone. We got shafted by the Australia and New Zealand. So to think that we won't get shafted by the US is incredible. Anyway, that is my rant. Sorry, you guys go and speak.
Okay, I mean, everything somehow is connected, and I think slowly going back to the main topic, even Brexit was a test on how propaganda and how disinformation can work well, because I mean, has been a disaster, honestly. And for what regards Ukraine, as a program was not accessible to UK companies because we were out of European Union, for example. So we could have benefited from that, but we didn't because we were out. And so we were on our own, have to fund with our own, completely by our own the entire programs that we are currently running. So that's the importance of being together rather than isolated. And regarding how much we love US, on the 11th of October, the Defense Secretary John Healey announced that UK is going to explore plan to restart production of a nuclear fuel cycle in UK. So for our defense, for defense purpose, of course, is not a not for nuclear weapon, but for nuclear reactor on submarines. And this is a very big stick in the eye of Trump, because this was something that we were buying from them. So there is a particular reason for doing that, and this is something that in Europe now is like a buzzword, depending on how you see that, but is resilience. So UK is doing whatever it takes to become a resilient country, which means do not have to rely too much on not exactly trustworthy partner. And US at the moment is, of course, an important ally, but maybe yes, maybe not, you don't know. So you want to be, at least so on critical aspect, very much independent. And this brings us to the very key issue in Europe. So there are some systems which Europe do not have. For example, Patriot is one of these. We don't have an exact alternative to Patriot in the short term.
Which is why they're putting a lot of effort into the SAMP-T upgrade that is just coming online fairly soon. And I know the French have been really big on plugging that one.
Yes, but the problem is the production rate. how many you can do. That's the issue. So we have also IRIS-T, and on these GAU can comment for sure, but even that is not exactly an anti-ballistic missile, and the version that should be able to do that is far away to being developed. And Trump is coming in a month, so it's very, very much a problem for Europe, because even if we want to do all on our own, we don't have it in some aspects the system even to be built. And so this is probably the worst case scenario, the worst aspect of all this history, because against cruise missile and other threat, we are very well prepared, and we have, in the worst case scenario, possibility to use the Air Force. But for ballistic missile, you need ground air defense, and on these we are not in a good position. That's to
Yeah. Any thoughts on
return to
any?
the topic.
Goodness me, we've been around the houses, German. Any thoughts at all?
Novaris gave me some time to do something else. Just saw that, just for information, just saw that Scholz apparently called or had a phone conversation with Putin for the first time since 2022.
I had that up to talk about today, but we haven't quite got there. But yeah.
Yeah, he now officially got the phone call, and yeah, we can talk about that later. So don't worry, man. I got some time to do something else. Regarding IRIS-T, SLM, yeah, I mean, first of all, apparently, at least according to official information, the medium range version is capable of intercepting short range ballistic missiles, but I don't see any evidence of this. And also, the people who I talked to said, no, that's not true. So I completely agree with Daniele. Even if we now supply like 10 IRIS-T SLM fire units or 20 or whatever to Ukraine, that won't change the fact that we are not capable of intercepting ballistic missiles without additional Patriots. And when we are looking at the procurement from Germany, and Germany is like very, very top of the production line right now because we have given so much to Ukraine. Even we are just receiving the next fire unit in 2025, and then the next years the fire units, right? And so yeah, that's a serious issue. I absolutely agree with Daniela.
Has anyone thought about? So there, a few people have talked about how Trump could be susceptible to, in a kind of transactional way, buying aid from the US. So do you think Trump would at least sell American equipment? And then we have the idea of, why can't Europe just buy some Bradleys from the US to help the Ukrainians in their fight if the US has so many installations that are going to be scrapped anyways? I've got my. You guys can answer that.
Yeah, that's an option, but really much depend on the situation. And because as we say now, what we have on the table, again, let's try to do this in a systematic way. If we want to propose a deal, and it is very likely that he won't, because he's talking about this essentially since the start of his campaign. It's very unlikely that he's suddenly saying, no, guys, I was wrong, or Russia have to be defeated. It's very unlikely, especially from the signal of that he's giving by selecting certain people, and also his vice president is Vance is completely anti-Ukraine, completely. So not even against a war from a pacifistic point of view. Is completely against. Is all. Sometimes he also repeated the Russian propaganda. So on this basis, if he sell us the weapon, he will prolong the conflict in the eye of his voters. So I don't think this is something that we can expect, at least immediately. So my point of view is that
there's also the issue that in Bradley specifically, that you've had Greece going around and looking at Bradleys and thinking they're in such crap condition that they are not going to, but because Greece were going to buy some or get hold of some in a deal. Another country is going to have a look. I think BAE Systems had a look and they were so I expect them to be on subsequent aid packages over the next 2 months. I think you're going to see some Bradleys there, but they undoubtedly will need a bit of a more than a buff up. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, I mean, Europe at this moment is a really I think we have listened about Europe being a pivotal moment many times, but never like this, because now Europe have to decide what to really want to do. Want to grow up and do something on their own, or we want to still waiting for others to do something for us, because a way to try to defeat Trump on Ukraine is doing the same things that we do kinetically with Putin. Show them force and resolution and willing to continue whatever it takes for real. So to continue to support, organize ourselves, show that we can defend our own, and put him in a position and say, these guys are going to continue anyway. I can't do anything. And then we can come to him and say, look, you didn't stop this, but we can buy from you. You have something. You produce. We buy. You get something. We get something, and we finish this. That's the only way on how you can sell the continuation of the war to Trump. He has to win something from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's that transactional nature where he's the hero. This is what I was saying before he won the election. Is like the only way Trump helps Ukraine is if he comes out of it thinking he's the winner for Ukraine. It has to be an appeal to some kind of egotistical element of his psyche. And I think if you can manipulate him in that way, and that's how Putin, I think, manipulated him in 2018 in Helsinki at the famous Helsinki press conference. You just need to somehow both flatter him into helping and then make him see that he gains, the US gains, and by extension he gains as a result of Ukraine prevailing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the signal that we receive from Europe is positive, at least from the few information that we can see, and also by the trend. And now I'm talking more about what you said at the opening. So what's going on in UK? So it has been, I think, from this summer that was announced that UK was going to build artillery barrel again after more than a decade. Now, this barrel have been a very hot topic in UK defense industry because there was no one doing this, essentially no one. BAE is the owner of most of the platform and also the biggest contractor in for artillery munition, artillery system. So stepped in to essentially restart the production. But however, this needed the help from all the industry. In fact, Sheffield Forge Master stepped into helping this, and the government allowed also British Steel to come into the rescue because we need the steel, we need the experience, we need to train people, but then we need also military, a defense industry, and BAE is the defense industry that we needed.
So just to give people a bit of context to this, and I talked about this in the video I haven't yet released, but Sheffield is very famous for steel. It's where all our cutlery and knives and all sorts has traditionally been made. But the British steel industry has been in a lot of trouble for some time.
Yep.
It was taken over by the Indian concern Tata, who then essentially is closed it down, I think, in places like Port Talbot in Wales. But there are elements we got recycled. We used different forges, I think. Anyway, without getting into the depths of the detail here, this is one of these situations where helping Ukraine and investing in our defense industry helps our economy.
Yes, definitely, and also build up knowledge, because the factory now is under construction. The main building is done. The foundation for the machine are done. You can have a sneak peek of what machine is going there. This is is very likely the foundation for a radial forging machine. So this factory is being created in Sheffield because there is a forge master close by. And the reason why this is happening is, of course, to support Ukraine, but also to respond to a problem. What happens if there is a war and UK need to replace a barrel? We have none. So this is a very good example of trying to take a point of disadvantage and transform, because there is new job, the economy is going to benefit, and also the British steel industry is still in very big trouble, by the way, because we still have problem. But this is a first movement that also allow politicians to work on this problem, trying to solve them. And this is just one of many other things. The fact that we are going to reevaluate if it's good to produce our own nuclear fissile material for our nuclear reactor, that's another very important step.
Yeah, because there's, I mean, you said this isn't to do with nuclear missiles necessarily, but it might be connected.
No, completely not.
Yeah, but we have got this situation where we are completely dependent on the US for our nuclear missiles, aren't we? To differing degrees, and I think that there is this kind of understanding that, yeah, this special relationship with the US might be really important, but the winds, if the winds of politics are volatile, and if government in the US is fickle, then actually we need to be, from our own security point of view, much more independent. Anyway, sorry.
No, yes, exactly. And even if there was Harris in the office, this should be a good move, and the move to be done, because let's say that something happened in Taiwan and US is completely cut off from Europe. What we do then? We would be anyway with much less help from US. So for this reason, I would say that Trump is a problem, is probably one of the biggest threat to Europe, but also an opportunity to now say, okay, it's done. We cannot revert it. We have to accept it, and we can choose of succumb to the situation, or try to do whatever it takes to turn the card on the table. So
yeah, which plays into this idea that I've long been talking about, which is that there are pros and cons to US isolationism, and by isolationism I mean the demand that the EU, that Europe pays. Europe's not paying enough for NATO. Like, first of all, he doesn't understand NATO. Like, you don't pay for NATO, you pay for your own defense and blah blah blah. But anyway, mainly speaking, but it's this tension that you want Europe to spend more on its defense and become more independent, means that we're less dependent on the US, which means there's less money going to the US, which means the US has less power as well. Because as we become more dependent, we can make decisions more unilaterally, or without the consideration, without the US dictating things inside NATO and inside the security network infrastructure of the world. And that kind of isolationism is not going to help the US. In fact, if you want USA and want to be the top of the hegemonic ladder, by investing in security and exporting your security around the world. Perun did an excellent video on this a couple of years ago, where he's saying, look, this idea that that Europe needs to pay more, the US is kind of happy paying more because actually they get to dictate stuff. They're exporting their security. They get the trade deals in return, and they are at the top of the hegemonic ladder. And by isolating themselves more and retreating into their own borders, they're giving up power and they're giving up influence. And they will also have a hit on their economy, on their defense industry, as the EU spends more inside the EU than in America. So these decisions come at, there are pros and cons.
Yeah, I totally. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And to mention one, I mean, the British Steel, just to return on that topic and then to close it, has been in very big trouble after Tata. Now, I think British Steel, which is one of the main partner of this effort in producing barrels, and is experiencing very big issues. And the government just few days ago announced another 2.5 billion investment in British Steel, in order to make this transition to a more greener production, because this was one of the issues, the high cost of UK steel that would not take commission essentially from any country, because they can buy from China or other mills that are more advanced, and so they can pay less. So the idea of trying to strengthen this sector, I think, is very important, and it should not be seen as like a waste of money, like saying, oh, the government is just trying to subsidize something. It is an investment, because by doing this, we invest in our capability of defending ourselves and also our allies, and in this case, ultimately Ukraine, because all these is done at the moment for support Ukraine artillery. And of course, we are not like, we are doing also this because we need that. But it will be at the moment for Ukraine. And that's a very big signal.
Germany to Ukraine, like this, I've talked to you about this before, but I presume that Rheinmetall and these other many other German concerns are also very much a part of the. Well, okay. The question is there a resurgence in investment in these concerns? Is there a resurgence in economic impact? How much are these concerns like Rheinmetall affecting the economy positively? Is there anything that's a parallel going on in Germany compared to what we've just been talking about with regard to the UK?
Tough question. I mean, in the end, of course, that I think both things are very much connected, right? I mean, I hope that I understand your question correctly. Because we've seen that, for example, with the new factory which is being built in Germany right now, in Unterlüß, there's a 155 factory which is being, I believe, built since February 2024, and they want to open it in 2025, start with a production of like 50,000 shells in the first year, I believe 100,000 in the second year, and 200,000 shells in the third year. And this was a massive investment by Rheinmetall, I believe a couple of €100 million. And in the end, they got a framework contract out of that worth 8.5 billion, something like this. Because of the production. So I think investments in our own investments by the companies, if it's in Germany or in Ukraine itself, always will result in, because they're not doing that without anything else, right? We, for example, also see this with Quantum Systems, the German defense company who is producing the vector drones, which are being delivered to Ukraine. They, for example, they have opened their production line and the spare part production in Ukraine months ago, and they are waiting for, or they are in negotiations for another contract value at, I believe, 150 million euros for 812 drones, and so this is very much connected.
So as we sort of meander on towards concluding, there's just another subject. But before we look at some of the comments and some of the thanks to the viewers, Rustem Umarov. So he's been meeting today in Norway, as we heard earlier. He says Ukraine has not changed its goals to liberate all of its territories. Defense Minister Rustem Umarov says so. This is how he commented information in the New York Times that Kyiv is ready to postpone the issue of territories in negotiations, freeze the front lines, and focus on security guarantees. Now, obviously, he's going to be, I guess, pressured to say that they're not going to give up getting all their territories back. How realistic do you guys think it is that Ukraine can get its territories back, and what would have to happen for it to do so?
Can I go first, GAU? Then
yeah, sure, go ahead.
So I like this because this question, because it's a kind of question that put ourselves on our moral obligation and our technical obligation on the line. So I think in the current situation, Ukraine is in a situation where it can hold the line, but for obvious reason, both in terms of manpower and material, it can't do more than what it's doing, and it's clear. Now, asking it can take back what it should is, of course, a question that you have to think like now, as it is now. Of course not. You can advance. I mean, we can see we have to retreat to favorable position and defend. So of course not. But the problem is not what he can do now, but what is the plan? What is the vision? And I think what really lacks, not Ukraine probably, but mostly us, the West, is the vision of the victory. So saying this can be done because we can see Russia struggling badly because they are asking help to whatever they can ask. And they're getting.
And that was the problem with the Biden administration, is that, and in fact, Mike Johnson and Republicans did, I think, and I said this at the time, I do get the desire to get a victory plan from the US. Like, how do we see Ukraine winning? But then the difficulty was, well, you can't demand a victory plan if you don't, and say, so Mike Johnson also said to Ukraine, we won't give you aid until you tell us what your victory plan is, and the Ukrainians are like, we can't give you a victory plan until we know what aid we're going to get. And you had this chicken and the egg situation. But certainly I think there's a lack of vision that's come from the Biden administration in terms of laying out exactly how Ukraine, or how they think Ukraine could win, not to dictate to Ukraine, but to say, well, look, this is one vision that we have.
Yeah, and also go in public and say that loud is important for the political point of view. But I want to say this, and then I will go quiet. But Ukraine have to take back everything for one simple reason: international order.
Yeah,
I know that
agree.
looks like, oh, this is an ideological position. It's not. It's a position that will preserve the world to go into a perpetual state of war. Because if Putin or whoever can gain an inch of another territory by doing an aggression, then what prohibit another country to do the same? Why Austria
or at least another nuclear
state,
particularly.
Yeah, now I was putting like a joke, but yeah, you got the point. So it's very important that international orders are respected, because they are the real deterrence from having real escalation in Europe and around the world. If we allow this not to happen, we will face much greater consequences. And this is something that we have to prevent, and we can prevent by preventing a Russian victory, which could be even a deal for me.
So it goes back to the tornado thing, which is like, well, we could just let that wreck our property, but we can either spend money to build this property up so it's resistant to future tornadoes, or we can save that money, but then we will be screwed in 2 years' time. And it's like, how much are we willing to speculate, to accumulate? How much are we willing to spend money up front now as an investment for 2-3 years down the line? And the problem is that most democratic governments exist on 4-year cycles, and so it might not be that we end up having our asses bitten until 6 years down the line when Russia do it again. But by that time there's a different government, so people think only in very short term ways. But anyway, sorry, Germany, what were your thoughts on? But not that Daniele told us how they could win, but he said that it should be a vision that they are going to take back all their territories.
Well, I think we can all agree, also from the viewer perspective, we can all agree that that Ukraine has to get back all of its internationally recognized territories, which includes Crimea, of course. The big problem, and Daniele already talked about this, and I really don't have anything to add, is they can't achieve this by their own. Like, the situation as it looks right now, they won't get it. There are no big offensives possible or anything else. They need a lot of more assistance from us when they want to achieve that. And there's really nothing more to say about that. We can all rant about, they have to do it, and they need to do it because of international order. And I completely agree. But the thing is, we should realistically think about the fact when our governments are not supporting Ukraine on a much, much larger scale, then it won't happen. It doesn't matter how much we write about it, how loud we scream about it, it won't happen without our governments. And that's where we should start changing things.
Yeah. And that's the difficulty, yeah, because if you got the US looking, they're going in that direction, and then you got Europe is at this inflection point. Do we, don't we? And unless we go all, Brian Ivey says if international order is primary, then the West has to go all in. Agreed. But the West isn't and won't. I don't know that I agree. I don't know is the answer. I don't know that it won't. Well, certainly the US won't. And I think unless some of the things that happened that we talked about previously, that Putin has a chance of shooting himself in the foot. And if Putin goes wrong and miscalculates with Trump could end up going all in on Ukraine. What's the probability of that happening? I don't know. So Brian then says, well, what's the next acceptable thing for Ukraine? So if they can't have all of that, then what is acceptable for Ukraine? And that's a great question. I don't know that we have the time for that, but that's a really good question.
I have a short answer.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
So the only possibility is that if you freeze the conflict, you get Ukraine in NATO, in European Union, and you get an enormous amount of funding to make Ukraine like the best country in Europe. Yeah. And then the rest that is occupied will crumble as East Germany did in the end. That's the theory. The practice is that this is not going to happen for a simple reason. The only guarantee that you have peace after this is that you have NATO membership and or European troops on the ground. Now, Putin will never agree on that. Never.
And nor will JD Vance, by the sound of it, and Trump. Actually, they seem to be making sounds that they shouldn't be able to join NATO and the EU. But you're absolutely right that, like, if you are going to have frozen front lines, then that's a brilliant point that Ukraine just needs to be a shining example of democracy inside the borders of the EU, so that it's like this across the border to Russia. It's like, yeah, okay, you've got the Donbass, you've got Crimea, but look at how well we are doing as a nation, and you're not. And all of these areas of the Donbass and Crimea are absolutely bombing. So my view is that the only way that Ukraine wins this war in any kind of conceivable way has to be the economic crumbling of Russia. And this is why I think that the sanctions are almost more important than all the weapons stuff that we've been talking about for an hour and a half. Like, sanctions are insanely important. Oil can be used, like the price, like the one thing Trump has said that is sensible is that you bring down the price of oil, Russia's screwed. And that is important. So you do both of those things, and you have the war going on, and you have the drain on personnel that this is for Russia, and the effect on the labor market that has. And Russia's screwed. They will not be able to sustain this war for too much longer. So I think Russia has to crumble from within for them to lose on the battlefield. Is my general opinion. I don't know if you guys agree or not.
Yeah, and I would add also the possibility to use long strike munition.
I always say that. Yeah, it's about missiles, drones, and an absolute ton of them, like absolutely loads. Hit your refineries, hit your air bases. I don't understand how after 2.5 years they don't have thousands of missiles manufactured that could fire deep into Russia. I don't get how that hasn't happened yet already. But nonetheless, like, they've got Neptunes. Like, why have they not got thousands of Neptunes being fired like on a monthly basis? I don't get it. But anyway, like, do that, Russia crumbles. Yeah, that's my view. Can I just say a big thanks to everyone? So Kevin Forst, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. You are a total legend. Johnny Nedregard, to the Donald going crazy in a survivable direction, or maybe in a not survivable direction, who knows. Niels Cunner, or Clement, thank you for gifting 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's insanely kind of you. Some loads of really good questions and comments. Gen Consensus has loads of questions that I'd starred here, and we just haven't had time to get onto them. Paul Gilbert, thanks for this live chat. The sooner we recognise this is a real existential crisis, the better. Lots to do in so little time. Couldn't agree more there at all. And we have Johnny Christensen, sorry. Have to go and walk my dog. Love from Langeland. Good stuff there. We have Paul Gilbert saying for the best on geopolitics, best news on geopolitics. Thanks, JP. Thank you. Really kind. And Ole Nielsen, super sticker there with some Danish love. We're getting the Nordic love. Mark, who's a total legend from Canada, all the way from Canada with his Ukrainian heritage from there. Has said, if Ukraine chose not to fight, imagine the predicament in NATO would be in right now. Gratitude for such courage should be shown with equally courageous support for Ukraine and not with an obsequious curtsy to Russia. I couldn't have put that better myself. That is my, I don't know if people can hear that, but my son is trying to send me a message, which is unfortunate. Sorry about this. I'm just having to tell my son I'm live. Anyway, thank you very much, Mark. That's really kind. Just if Ukraine chose not to fight, it would be almost the same as Ukraine just outright losing the war, which is exactly what Daniele was saying. That it just sends a message that if you are stronger than someone else and you've got nukes, you can just do what you like with impunity. People are afraid, and we've heard this. We've heard Rob Bauer from NATO, one of the NATO officers, NATO commanders, saying that the only reason we haven't shot down drones and missiles as NATO inside, that have been flying into Russia, into Ukraine. And the only reason we haven't been in Ukraine kicking Russia out is because they got nukes. He said very clearly, them having nukes is why we didn't go in and kick Russia out of Ukraine. But of course, if they didn't have nukes, you wouldn't have a NATO. So slightly moot point. But yeah, it's just we need to do something about this because otherwise it sends a message, the wrong message to any other erstwhile aggressor. Now, John Panciotti, thank you so much. It's insanely generous. I love this. Best wishes to all from the floating island of trash. So John Panciotti is from Puerto Rico, where, of course, that was the garbage, the Tony Hinchcliffe at the Madison Square Gardens Trump rally said that. So yeah, thank you, John. That's incredibly kind. I guess it might be worth just finishing on this, guys, if you don't mind. I don't know if you got time. Trump has done his clue is he could be convinced of anything, and the Russians have been working for over a decade to influence his ideas and perceptions of European security. So this is the he then goes on to say, no, he doesn't. That's Brian. Oh, I've got here. He goes. So, but what did the lapdog Lavrov? So Sergei Lavrov is the Russian foreign minister. What has Putin said? When Ukraine is weak, they have zero incentive to stop attacking. They see aid cut off as an incentive to continue pushing to victory. This goes back to what both of you guys were saying, which is that it depends what Russia do when given the option of being forced into negotiation or like not being forced into it, not taking that from the US, and whether that would then lead to the US supporting Ukraine. It seems that Putin is pushing very hard to gain ground now because it may not be possible to in the next few months. They're pushing artillery and armor crews and useless Navy sailors into assault units. And he then goes on to say, finally, however, Putin and his inner circle are way out of touch. Their generals are lying to them. They have no clue what's really happening on the ground. Russia is close to collapse too. What are your thoughts on those? Final. I know that some of the ground that we've already covered, but do you think Russia are close to culmination? Do you think they will get endless supplies from North Korea, like genuinely? And do you think that they would accept forced peace negotiations from the US?
Okay, in order, I can say that there is likely a possibility that they accept if they think this is good for their war effort. So if they can resell to their public that, coming to a deal and having something that they can depict as the total victory that was planned, doesn't matter if we know that this is not true, but for the domestic purposes more than enough, that's very likely and could happen. Despite I think that the circumstances may lead to the point that he has to refuse that. And for the culmination point, I think Russia now is benefiting the fact that mud season is not arrived. So they are trying to gain as much as possible, because probably they know that if there is a negotiation, they want to do this from a point of force. Okay, so so I think they will continue whatever it takes to push until they are completely unable to do any further progress. So I don't think they are. I don't think at this point we can speak about culmination. They are trying to proceed to obtain a political objective, as much as probably Kursk was, at least at the very beginning. And what was the other question? Sorry.
Unlimited supply from North Korea.
Yes.
That. Well, we have just seen that they are receiving very old artillery pieces. So I don't know how much endless, but they will continue to receive help in exchange, of course, of missile technology and support.
It's whatever you think. It just extends the war. It extends the moment of time before they genuinely culminate. Like those 10,000 troops are a massive worry, in my opinion, especially because my opinion is that there's no difference between 10,000 and 100,000 for Russia. Russia doesn't pay that much more for 100,000 North Koreans. And North Korea doesn't have to feed those people. My opinion is that they probably don't care much for their own population, and they're not going to get much kickback. And once those people go out of the nation, you can't really reintegrate them, because they've found, as we've found out recently, they've found the internet and pornography, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, I think that there isn't too much of a cost for Russia and for North Korea to supply huge numbers of people and huge numbers of old bits of equipment. And I think that even though they're not going to be the quality that Russia would ideally like, it will prolong their war effort, and it's a real issue against a very beleaguered, scarcely resourced Ukrainian army.
Yeah, on quality, I would object that the more troops are sent, the better they will become, because survivor will form other North Korean, which will end up to improve their own training before being deployed. So, in all honesty, I think why was concerning for NATO is not the number, but it's the fact that it's starting. And when you start, it's very unlikely that you stop, because then you want more people to get that experience. Think always that North Korea has not ended the conflict with South Korea. So this type of warfare is what you would see in Korea as well. And for this reason, I say that world order should prevail, because if it's not, what will prevent North Korea to try to attack South Korea? So I don't think they get much backlash for people that I mean, this is completely verified that despite of whatever sometimes the media say, because the war in Chechnya was stopped by the mother asking for stop the war because their son were killed. Nah, it's not going to happen now, because the circumstances are different. So Russia is very much went through more than 15, 20 years now of dictatorship, effectively. So they've been brainwashed. Who was trying to opposing Putin is dead or exiled.
And those who haven't been brainwashed have left the country. So yeah.
So I mean, this is the same fallacy that a lot of also expert analysts fall when they look at a situation and they try to do a parallel with the same country 20 years before. Russia is not the same country as Ukraine is not the same country of 2014 and even before. So now, if these things continue in terms of troops from North Korea in Kursk at the moment, and that is a problematic.
Yeah.
But the real challenge would be if these troops enter Ukraine, because until now they can still defend themselves saying, "Oh, we are in Russia, we are not in Ukraine."
Yeah, because this is arguably part of the bilateral security agreement that Russia signed a couple of months ago with North Korea. That was like Article 5. If Russia is attacked, then we can bring North Koreans in. So they can use them in Kursk, but arguably they could use them because they've now annexed and formally, as part of the constitution, given those 4 areas, sort of, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson as part of Russia. So you could argue that the North Koreans could be pushed there.
And if one of those soldiers end up in Ukraine, dead, I don't think Europe will be very happy, especially even Germany.
But we haven't said anything. There's been this claim from Blinken that will be this robust response or whatever, but we still haven't heard it anyway.
I mean, at this point, is more about there was this talk between Scholz and Putin, and I just read some of the outline, and looks like that, from what I understood, and GAU can confirm or deny what I'm saying, because I'm reading just the news as they come out, so I didn't post-process these. Looks like that Scholz said that you have to retreat your troop if you want to end these. And of course, the reply was no. So the point is that I have the feeling that if they want to test Europe this would be one possibility. So they try to send North Korean troop in Ukraine. And at that point, if no response, no significant response, which could be of any type, but not just, oh, we are concerned, that would be a testing point for both Putin, but also Trump, to look at if words are followed by action.
This is the learning point. Germinade, any thoughts on those points?
Which of the 100 he mentioned?
Yeah,
no, just to your original questions regarding the unlimited supply from North Korea. I don't think it's unlimited. Nothing is unlimited.
Yeah, I was. That was hyperbole.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I think we just saw that with the howitzers. It's maybe just the start.
Yeah, that's a worry.
And I mean, even if that's right now just 10,000 soldiers, I mean, when we divide that with the losses of manpower per day, that's 10 days of war, right? And so I think the North Koreans will be of great help to Putin and to Russia, and it's definitely not the end where we are right now. It will definitely be more, at least from my perspective. Yeah. And regarding accept ceasefire, I think Daniele already summarized it very well. I think it purely depends if Russia or Putin in general sees this or sees an ceasefire as an advantage to himself. Like when he doesn't, or when he doesn't see it that way, then he won't accept it. Of course not. Like why would he?
Which is interesting, because it might then depend on how much he knows things are going on the front line. Like the question I've always had is, how much does Putin know about how bad it is for his troops on the front line? Because he might then make a decision that actually, no, we're not in a place that we need to go to negotiations, when in reality they are in a place, but he just doesn't know that. But I don't know. That's a whole other question.
Well, I personally would say, and of course I have no intel on that, but I personally would say, especially in the beginning of the war, he maybe wasn't aware of what's really going on. I mean, to be honest, when he would have known that we are now nearly 3 years into the war, he probably wouldn't have attacked that way, blah, blah, blah. But given the fact that we are nearly 3 years into the war, I think he will be very good informed about what's going on. Of course, not into the details of every single unit, and nobody is that, but I think he has a very good general understanding of the situation right now.
Okay, well, look, thank you so much to BTC Bandit for the super sticker there. That's really, really kind. Brian Ivy, it's good to have you back. So Brian Ivy is like the Republican corrective to my liberal tendencies, where I'll go off on one about X, Y, and Z, and he'll be like, no, I think this. And you know, who knows, we might meet in the middle someday. Thank you, Brian. You're really kind, such a great support of the channel. I think you had moved house. That might be why we've not seen you for some time. Margaret de Velden, that's incredibly generous. Thank you for your Canadian love there. Very, very appreciated. Thank you. And Stephen Bendal from Norway. We were talking about Norway, and I'm due to have a chat to you, Stephen, at some point. We'll do that. It will happen. But he's gifted 580p Geopolitics memberships. He's now back from Kiev. He was in Kiev. Last thing, so Julian Roster, thanks, Julian. Such a great support of the channel as well. What is the likelihood of a new European armed force? I think it would be a great idea. Scandinavia joined their air forces to some degree. So very quickly, guys, is it likely to happen? Is it something you would welcome?
I don't think it's going to happen in this during this conflict unless something dramatic happen. But I think it's something that needs to be discussed, especially on French point of view. And France has always been inclined to have a more European oriented army. For two reasons. First, being cost effective and being very reliable for the defense industry of Europe, and also in a not anti-American completely, but in a way of detach European interests from those in US.
Yeah, if you listen to Macron's rhetoric over the last, well, forever, that's fully in line with what he's always said, which is, you know, on the one hand, America, you know, Trump's trying to push Europe away and say, you go and do your own thing. And on the other hand, Macron's saying, we want to be away from you and we want our independence. And that, as you say, fits in line with that. Interesting. Germany?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say that in addition to what Daniele already said. Yeah, not really anything.
Okay. Oh, something that we might see, but it's the sort of thing that would take an awful lot of time to put the structures in place. It's not something you could like, oh, well, let's get an army up together. There'll be like the financial agreements and the commitments from every nation, how that would look when you got all of these member states, quite often with different ideas of what they should be doing as well. Hungary and Slovakia are cases in mind. So yeah, definitely an interesting question. And I think if the US does isolate itself more, then there'll be more and more need for that. Okay. I just want to say, Kevin here says, I hope everyone gets to on Blue Sky. I was talking to German aid to Ukraine about this before we went live. So Blue Sky is the old Twitter, X is the new Reddit. It's really nice to see this movement of people towards Blue Sky. It's not that it's a safe space. I don't want to use that kind of trigger word, but it is a place where people can go about finding out about Ukraine, working together for Ukraine, getting decent news about Ukraine in a way that isn't disrupted by Russian trolls and bots, and also people who are diametrically opposed to supporting Ukraine. So either people who are selling the Kool-Aid or who are drinking the Kool-Aid, right? It's just a cool place. Now, because it's got better moderation, hopefully it will stay at least mainly that way. But it'd be great if people came over to Blue Sky, getting constant notifications of people saying, yeah, I'm joining, I'm following, I'm here because X, Y, and Z. You know, hello, Blue Sky. I was inspired to join because my favorite YouTuber, which is ATP Geopolitics. So that's awesome. Thank you, Uri, if I've pronounced that correctly. All sorts of people saying that kind of stuff coming across from Twitter. So it really good. And I despise Elon Musk. So if he is an oligarch with immense power, he's the most powerful single human being on earth. The more that we can stick spoons in his eyes, the better. Metaphorically speaking, of course. You guys are on Blue Sky, am I correct?
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky. I joined in July, I believe in July 2023. So as number 273,000 or something like that. So yeah, since a very long time. And yeah, Blue Sky is really skyrocketing. So just give you an example of how many users are currently joining or leaving X in particular. From when I started on Blue Sky, like in July 2023, until the day before the US election, I gained up to 2,300 followers, something like this. And since the US election, which is now a week or so, I more than doubled what I've gained previously in a year. It's really amazing to see, and yeah, right now it's a very, very nice place. Of course, there are a lot of moderation features implemented in the latest months. The big problem I see is, of course, that when Twitter really, really crashes, and right now it looks that way, a lot of bots and bad people will also join Blue Sky, and then it, of course, comes down to proper moderation.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I was just trying to find. I was seeing some interesting graphs about users on Blue Sky and whatnot, and people coming across. So you can find Germinator Ukraine on there. Daniela, you are on there as well. Am I not correct in saying? Yes, there we are. So
Yes,
you are
yes.
there as well. So you can follow them, and I presume is Tochny on there too.
Yes, of course.
Yes, absolutely. I'm still not published anything new on both X and Blue Sky. So on Blue Sky, I will try to have a more clean posting, let's say.
Yeah.
Reputation.
Reputation.
Yeah, so come and join in the party there, guys. So look, can I just say first of all, thank you to you two for being such amazing guests and being so knowledgeable. And sorry when I was going off on one and not allowing you guys to speak is a problem I have. So thank you very much, and thank you massively to all of those who's really generously support the channel in the live chat. So John Panciotti, Margaret de Velden, particularly Mark Biscu, Julian Rossiter, and all of you other legends as well, Brian Ivy, BTC Bandit, etc., etc., etc. Thank you so much for your support, Niels Clement. Really appreciate that. Guys, final words from you.
I just read a question. Do you think we need more nukes in Europe? My answer
this is one of the the whole Ukraine creating nukes, and you were saying this earlier. Actually, Poland could do with nukes. Maybe sounds weird, doesn't it? Nuclear unproliferation.
Yeah, I'm honestly not against nuclear weapon in the sense that they are a requirements as soon as others have, because we see that the use of the threat of nuclear weapon is there. I think what will be the very big game changer will be hypersonic weapon, which at the moment no one has, even Russia, despite they say that they have, but they don't have. They don't have the real one.
Yeah.
That's where we have to work.
Yeah, so from my side, nuclear weapons, I mean, it's an interesting idea, but I think when Germany would get one, at least one specific neighboring country is going to worry a little bit for historical reasons. Apart from that, what I want to say is what I'm saying every time when I'm here, that I really enjoyed it. And apart from that, that people think about, I don't want to get people away from donating to you, Jonathan. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, no, please, yeah.
But please think about the fact that your government, and that includes every country in the world right now who's supporting or which is supporting Ukraine, isn't doing enough. And if it really comes to that, the US is not giving Ukraine any assistance anymore, please donate to the Ukrainian people, donate to the Ukrainian army. There are a lot of good fundraisers out there on X and now also on Blue Sky. They need our money and our assistance so they can buy SUVs and drones and spare parts and thermal gear and all that kind of stuff for themselves, because they don't have the proper funding. They rely on us, and that's my call to everyone here. Instead of buying a pizza every Saturday, and maybe do it every 2 weeks, and the money you save, you spend to the Ukrainian army, or when you go to Starbucks, maybe you save one coffee and donate it to Ukrainian fundraiser.
Lots of people have starter packs on Blue Sky, and there are many kind of NAFO ones. We've just done fundraising and fundraised 2 trucks for Ukraine. That was brilliant. So, but there are so many fundraisers there. Always check to make sure that they are like genuine, and there's always people associated with Turchny which are good to support, like Constantine. You can find him on Blue Sky. He is often fundraising for diggers and whatnot. So he's definitely someone that's worth. Look, there you go. And that's Liberty Ukraine there. So they even got the truck now. They do it so often. This is absolutely fantastic, and that allows them to build fortifications and whatnot. So, you know, short of any ideas, go and support Liberty Ukraine. Go and support Konstantin and his efforts. And I'm sure you two would somewhat agree with that, unless you've got your own ones going.
No, absolutely, it's one of the best.
Yeah, Konstantin is great. And at the moment, I'm not fundraising, so I can only redirect you guys on Konstantin, because Konstantin is collecting for engineering vehicle for a while, and they are really fundamental to save lives by building fortification. And another group that I really would like to advocate personally is Wild Hornets.
Yes, and I've been trying to get on the guy there to speak to me, but it just hasn't happened yet. But yeah, carry on.
No, I mean, Wild Hornets is one of the many groups that develops and procure FPV drone to the armed forces of Ukraine. That is one of the few that innovate really a lot and brings new technology directly on the battlefield. So
yeah, Erland visited them when he went to
yes.
Ukraine, didn't he? So he has a lot that he can't tell us about what he found out, but it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some of the stuff that he saw now are used, like the drone that was announced recently. So they do fantastic jobs, and they really contribute to the war effort.
Yeah, so I've put Wild Hornets and I've put profile for Konstantin in the live chat. So if you want to click on that, please go and do so. Worthwhile causes. Thank you for saying that, and that's really important. Right. Well, thank you both again. Really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you guys in the live chat. Please spread the word about Ukraine. Don't let it fall from people's consciousnesses. It's too important. And let's hope that the right outcome takes place with regard to the new administration in the US. I'm so worried. Like, every single appointment I see getting made is like the single worst human being I could think in that position. Putting someone, what was it, RFK Jr. has just been appointed, or the nominee for the Human Health Services, and he said, literally, his quote was, I think we should put, I'm paraphrasing here actually, but it was, we need to stop drug development and infectious disease research, i.e. for 8 years. We need to put it on stall for a little bit of time, 8 years. So like the US, the guy they're going to have in charge of the health services is just going to put drug development on hold for 8 years, like, and infectious disease research on hold for 8 years. Like, a person in charge of national intelligence is a Russian simp. Person in charge of the attorney general is someone who's routinely broken the law and doesn't pay his legal dues. Just like the single worst person each time. So it depresses me. I'm somewhat like pulling my hair out, and I haven't got much hair left. But if we can keep that pressure on ourselves as individuals, then, you know, it's at least something, and it does give us at least a feeling of power. Anyway, that's enough from me whinging. Thanks, guys, and thank you to everyone else. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
Heroям slava.
Nice one. Cheers, guys.